Lisa K. Crawford. I hope everyone has had a great Wednesday. Is this Tuesday or Wednesday? Oh my God, this is so bad. Yeah, I know it's Tuesday, but the week is going so fast. So happy Tuesday to everyone. And I just wanted to come on and talk a little bit about listings. If you're a homeowner and you decide that you're going to have to sell your home or you want to sell your home, whatever the reason may be, you're going to have to uh, sign a listing agreement if you're going to allow a real estate professional to assist you. So, you might as well understand what's on that listing agreement. It's a lot of detail, it's important. I want to try to go through it as quickly as possible, yet shedding some important information that's on this listing agreement. If the listing agreement is handled, executed properly, then generally the property should sell for the highest and best value. And so that's always the goal when you're a seller. So let's take a look at this listing agreement. Um, let's get right over to it. You guys bear with me. I sound like a pro, but I'm still a little bit of an amateur when it comes to some of this streaming technology. So we're going to share our screen here. And here we go. This is a Florida exclusive brokerage listing agreement. So you see this a lot in Florida. So let's go through all the sections. You'll see along the left-hand side, the lines are numbered for easy reference. We'll use that a lot. And you'll see the numbered paragraph section starting with number 1. And we'll go through the entire document using the lines and the numbered paragraphs. So what just happened here? All right, so we have our listing agreement, and something weird just happened for me. Hold on, guys. I'm not sure what just happened. So I just had my listing agreement in front of me. So let me try this one more time. I'm going to share my screen one more time. I'm not sure what happened. And, oh gosh, where's my document? Sorry, all that wasn't supposed to be up there. But anyway, here we go. Here's the listing agreement, and we'll go over it now. So starting with line 1, you see this exclusive brokerage listing agreement is between lines 2 and 3 indicate the seller and the broker respectively. The seller would be the homeowner, of course, and the broker is the brokerage, the real estate brokerage, buying through its agent. So that agent that's sitting there talking with you about this listing agreement is the broker, representing the broker. Or it could be the actual broker, him or herself. So line 4, which is paragraph number 1, talks about the authority to sell. You, the seller, you're giving authority right here in paragraph 1 to this broker to sell your property. You're starting with a beginning date that they can begin to market your property, and you're going to put an ending date there, and that's on line 6, and that will be the end of the period that this broker has to get your property marketed and sold. And you will see right along in lines 11 and 12 that this property will be offered to any person without regard to race, color, religion, sex, handicap, familial status, national origin, or any other factor protected by federal, state, or local law. So you see all of those protected statuses right there. So you cannot ask a realtor to violate any of those protected federal statuses. It would be illegal and unethical. So understand that that is built right into the listing agreement. Also on line 12 into line 13, the seller is certifying that they represent that he, she, it uh, has the legal authority to sell the property, to convey the property and all the improvements. So that would be she, he, it. All right. So yes, all of those statuses right there, all of those pronoun statuses are there. Now, on line 14, this is paragraph number 2. This is where you would list the description of the property, starting with the street address. What is the address of the property, please? And then line 17, we need a legal description. The best place to get a legal description is the deed. So if I'm on a listing appointment and I'm talking to a seller, I'm going to ask them to have certain documents already out so that I can look at. One of those things will be the actual deed to the property, the original deed, a copy of the original recorded deed, and that is where you really want to pull the legal description. That's the best place. So you put the legal description in, and then on line 19 there, sometimes sellers are selling not only the house, but they're selling the appliances, the washer, the dryer, the ice maker, the dishwasher, whatever appliances are being sold, they should be listed on line 19. Why? Because that becomes a part of the broker's marketing about what type of appliances come with the property in the sale. And just the same token, if you know you're a buyer and you don't want to get rid of your washer and dryer, or there's some appliance that you definitely want to keep or hold back, you want to make sure that it does not get listed there on line 19, because you don't want any disputes over that later, right? And you see there, you can also put some attachments if you want to add a list of documents or items. Line 21 is where section C is. It talks about occupancy of that property. And there you want to indicate whether or not the property is or is not occupied by a tenant. Sometimes the owner of the property is not the actual occupant of the property, so you can't assume that. So that's where you would make that disclosure. If the actual occupant is under a lease agreement, then you want to indicate when the lease term expires there. Again, this is information that realtors want to know. So if they're out there looking for properties, they're going to want to know whether or not a property is tenant occupied. Line 23, which is paragraph 3, it corresponds with that. It talks about the price and the terms. This is a very important section that the seller and the broker need to go over. Why? Because you want to get line 24A right. You want to make sure that this property is priced in the way that it will sell. That means obviously for the seller, the highest and best possible price that corresponds with the fair market value, what people are willing to pay for this property out there on the open market. That's going to be the highest and best price. And there are a number of ways that a broker will get at that. One of the best ways is to actually take a look around the neighborhood if you're the broker and see what has sold in the last 3 months. See what has sold in the last 6 months. You want to try to get close in time to when you're going to list this property. So the last 3 to 6 months is pretty good. So if you see similar properties that have sold for a certain value and there's a range within that selling prices, then that's going to give you some idea of what this property will sell for as well. And so one thing you need to remember is that if you do overprice your property, basically, no one's buying that property. What you're really doing is you're selling all the other properties in the neighborhood. So when your property is overpriced, you're selling everybody else's property that is more reasonably priced. So keep that in mind. You want to really nail it on line 24, which is A, the price. B, are the financing terms. Are you accepting cash, conventional financing, VA, FHA? What are the financing terms that you're willing to accept? And so you will want to go over this with your realtor, depending on what your level of motivation, how fast you want to sell the property, how willing you are to help people be able to get out there and acquire the property on different types of financing terms. That's a conversation under 3B. Also under 3B, a seller can help finance the sale of his or her home by holding what's called a purchase money mortgage. So in this case, basically you have the seller lending money to a buyer and then placing a mortgage on that property to protect their interests. And so long as the buyer pays his or her mortgage on time agreed for the duration, then that is a great outcome. In that respect, you will never have had to go to a bank to the extent that you had an agreement with the seller to hold a purchase money mortgage. And that's referenced on line 26. Another financing alternative that the seller could agree to is an assumption of an existing mortgage. And the terms are indicated there on line 28. You would fill that information out. How much of a mortgage would the buyer be assuming? What is the assumption fee? What's the mortgage term? All of those things would have to be agreed upon. And then a buyer can pursue becoming an approved loan, approved under a loan assumption with the banking institution. So that's how that would work. And obviously that would be, if you have any interest in that, you would have to ask questions of your real estate professional. There are some other things in this section that's very important to go over. We won't be able to go over every single little thing, but we're definitely going to go over some of the big picture items. So you may definitely want to go back and review this section. I can put the PDF out there just so people can look at the Florida listing agreement. This is a standard agreement you see that a lot of Florida realtors will use. All right, so some of the rest of that under financing has to do with, if you pick loan assumption, there are some things that you need to be aware of. There are some seller expenses that may apply and that you would need to be aware of. Section 4 has to do with broker obligations. What is the broker obligated to do? Line 41 says that a broker agrees to make diligent and continue efforts to sell the property in accordance with this agreement until a sales contract is pending on the property, right? So that broker's obligation continues until your property is under contract. And once it's under contract, then that broker needs to go ahead and guide that contract to a successful closing. That will be the idea. Number 5 talks about the multiple listing service. This is a marketing tool that's used by realtors, and it's a very great tool because your property gets put on blast to so many different realtors at once that it's amazing. So you place your property in a multiple listing service depending on your geographical location, and the seller's property is then exposed to a large number of potential buyers by and through their real estate agents. So that would be the multiple listing service. And there's certain information that your agent, your broker will then report on that multiple listing service about your property, including a nice description of the property that's being sold, some details on the property that will basically entice brokers to want to bring their clients to check out your property. Also on the MLS, you'll find the actual showing instructions. If there are certain documents or forms that need to be filled out in connection with getting under contract. All of those things will be on the MLS. So the MLS is a very important tool for realtors. Under Section 6, it talks about the broker's authority. The seller authorizes the broker to do certain things, that is, to market that property to the public. And that includes a number of different ways: flyers, yard signs, digital marketing, etc., websites. You see it all there on line 53, 54, 55. It also talks about different things that your broker will be doing to market this property. So you'll see, let me see. For instance, on line 58, it talks about placing an appropriate transaction signs on the property, using the seller's name in connection with marketing or advertising. That is on line 60. Line 62, the seller does not authorize broker to display the property on the MLS. Well, I would never recommend that to my seller. You definitely want to market the property if you're trying to sell it. Now, I will say that there are specific reasons why a seller may not want this or a seller may not want that. And excuse me, an agent has to listen to what those reasons are and make sure that he or she understands where the seller is coming from, because you always want to work hard to meet the needs of your client. So that section right there, section 6, has to do with the broker authority, and the seller authorizes certain marketing, and then you go through that entire list with your broker. Section 7 has to do with the seller's obligations. Oh, you thought the broker was the only one that had obligations, huh? Well, no, the seller actually has obligations as well. And one of the big things is that the seller has to cooperate with the broker in carrying out the purpose of the agreement, which is obviously to get that property sold. So there are a number of items there that a seller has to also agree to do. And one of the things, like for instance, line 91, this is C, subsection C, provide the broker with keys to the property and make the property available for the broker to show during reasonable times. Well, guess what? If you don't cooperate with that, then there's limited marketing and exposure of your property going on, and you're frustrating the process as the seller. So you are actually agreeing within this document not to do things to frustrate the sale. That would be basically beyond the point. Also, D says to inform the broker before leasing, mortgaging, or otherwise encumbering the property, and immediately upon entering into a sales contract with a buyer procured by the seller. So if you are the type of seller that's out there, you have an active broker engaged, looking out for your interests, working to bring buyers to you, but you're out there doing your own things, such as encumbering your property by signing new lease agreements or new mortgages, or doing all kind of things like that, that will really affect the transaction that your broker is trying to obtain for you, then you need to disclose those things, because that can change the deal. So there are a number of things here. I'm sure they have been well thought out. That a seller really has an obligation to do. Another one, because I know we can't go through each and every one of them, but another one would be G on line 101. A seller has an obligation to make all legally required disclosures, including all facts that materially affect the property's value and are not readily observable or known by the buyer. Moreover, The seller certifies and represents that seller knows of no such material facts, such as building code violations, unobservable defects, etc., other than the following. And the reason why it says other than the following is because what you do know in this section, you must disclose. This is where a lot of sellers can get into trouble with their contracts. You are legally obligated to disclose certain information about your property, which the human eye cannot readily observe. So if you know that the property is sinking by so many inches every calendar year or every blue moon, you need to disclose that. Or if you know of some type of termite infestation and the structure is barely there and the next wind might knock it over, and again, if it's not readily observable, you should disclose that to be on the safe side. Because if a buyer wants to buy your property, it's best that they buy with full knowledge of exactly what they're purchasing. So keep all of that in mind under Section 7, which lists out the seller's obligations when selling his or her property. 8 has to do with compensation. Seller will compensate the broker for doing this great work, for bringing, or as the language here on line 109 suggests, for procuring a buyer who is ready, willing, and able to purchase the property or any interest in the property on the terms of this agreement or any other terms acceptable to the seller. So whatever terms the buyer and the seller ultimately come up with based on that arrangement, that will be the basis for compensation to the broker. So as you can see on line 111, it indicates what is the percentage of the total sales price that is being paid to the broker. So that's where that would be listed. Under B, what is the dollar amount or the percentage of consideration for any type of option that's created under an agreement between a buyer and a seller? For instance, an option fee contract. C, what is the dollar amount or percentage of gross lease value of a leasing agreement that the broker helps to put together on behalf of the seller? So instead of selling, you end up in some type of leasing agreement. All of those things are compensable to your broker, and each one of those sections can be filled out ahead of time depending on and are applicable depending on what type of arrangement is entered into with a potential buyer or leasee, someone who leases. Excuse me. The broker's fee is due when? That's under Section D. So if an interest in the property is transferred, or there's, like we just talked about, or if there's some type of lease or exchange or some other type of transfer of ownership interest that is compensable to a Florida realtor, that would be due under the circumstances listed here. And also this section on line 124, it talks about other circumstances where a realtor's commission would be due even if there was some type of termination of the sales contract. So in certain circumstances, even if the contract is terminated, a realtor's commission can still be protected. So you have to keep that in mind. All right. And so getting back to our, oh boy. So somehow I keep, here we go. We're back. So the next section that we're going to look at is section 9. I think there's one other thing I want to talk about. On line 128, quickly, still looking at the preceding section on compensation. Line 128 has to do with retained deposits. So there are times when the seller will enter into a contract with a potential buyer, and that potential buyer, for some reason, ends up losing his or her escrow deposit. And if that ever happens, this section spells out how that escrow or those monies or deposits are to be allocated. And if the seller and the broker do not enter into a specific agreement, then generally it will be split 50-50 between the seller and the broker. And that's section E. Looking at paragraph 9, this talks about cooperation with and compensation to other brokers and the notice to the seller. So, even though it is the seller that is paying the commission, what often happens is that it's other realtors, other brokers that are out there that are showing this property or the seller's property to their clients. And so it's these other agents that are really bringing the buyers. Sometimes it's the seller's agent that goes out and finds a buyer too. And in that case, there is no compensation to any other broker because there's just one broker involved. And we'll talk more about that. But in this case, where there's other agents out there showing the property and they enter into a contract with the seller, and the property ends up being sold to some buyer who's represented by a buyer's agent, then that buyer's agent gets paid through this paragraph number 9. There is essentially like a commission split right here. So a percentage of the purchase price or a dollar amount will go to a single agent, which is line 134. Or you can have a percentage of the purchase price or a dollar amount go to a transaction broker, or, and that's line 135. And follow me with the lines, or a percentage of the purchase price or a dollar amount goes to someone who has no brokerage relationship with the buyer. So paragraph 9 brings up a real important section as it transitions into section or paragraph 10, and that is what type of real estate agent, aka broker, is your realtor? Is your realtor a single agent? Is your realtor a transaction broker? Or is the person you're dealing with someone that you have no brokerage relationship with? What is the relationship? So 10 kind of deals with that a little bit more, because this agreement forces you to pay attention to that, and it has to be specified by checking it on line 138, 139, or 140. So you need to have a conversation with your broker, asking him or her, are you acting as a transaction broker? Are you acting as a single agent for me? Or are you under some no brokerage relationship with me? And that can all be explained to you in Florida. I will tell you that most of the time, Florida realtors act as transaction brokers, which mean that they are basically protecting the transaction between a willing buyer and a willing seller. And that broker is going to make sure that that transaction is basically handled well, and that the deal gets to closing. There are certain degrees of loyalty that come with whatever type of real estate relationship you have with the seller. So the highest degree of loyalty will be if your agent is a single agent. And then there are some loyalties and obligations, obviously, as a transaction broker, but it would not merit the highest degree of loyalty. So make sure that your broker goes over that section with you. 11 has to deal with conditional termination. There are times when a seller might decide that, look, I know I told you that I'd give you a year to sell this property or 6 months, but I changed my mind. I decided I'm keeping it, or I decided I want to do something differently. Whatever those reasons may be, the seller and the broker can enter into an agreement or make some agreement for a cancellation fee. And that would be on line 143 of paragraph 11. And why, a lot of times, why would you do that? So the thing is that what sellers need to realize is that brokers spend money. They spend money on marketing, getting professional photographs. If drone photography is needed, that's going to be a broker's expense. Marketing the property, maybe getting a website dedicated just to this property, open houses, marketing to other realtors that are out there. There are a number of different things, getting yard signs. There are a number of different things that brokers, realtors do to market properties. And so they do spend money in anticipation of a successful closing. And they know they'll be compensated ultimately. But if you cancel, then that never materializes. Hence, that's where that negotiated cancellation fee comes in. Paragraph 12 has to do with disputes. Sometimes sellers and their brokers can have a dispute. If there is a dispute, you can agree that you will mediate it. You can agree that you will go to arbitration. You can agree to this well before it ever happens in paragraph 12. Now, nothing may ever happen, and the idea is that nothing will ever happen that's bad, and there will be no bad relationship between the seller and the broker. However, if there is a circumstance, you can resolve how it will be handled right here as it's indicated in paragraph 12. And you can agree that you'll never go to court, that you'll let an arbitration body hear it, and that they will be the final arbiters of that decision. Hence, you'll be bound forever, henceforth and forevermore. And in a case like that, where you agree to go to like the American Arbitration Association, generally what happens is each side will pay his or her own fees, costs, expenses, attorney's fees, etc., and split the arbitrator's fee and administrative costs for the arbitration. And let me tell you, arbitration is not necessarily cheap. It is not necessarily cheap, but some say that, it could be less expensive than full-blown litigation in court, teaming up with lawyers, and that type of thing. 13 is a miscellaneous section. So there are some miscellaneous things that are also applicable in the standard listing agreement. This first sentence, I think, is really important on line 159, where it says this agreement is binding on sellers and brokers, heirs, personal representatives, administrators, successors, and assigns. That means also this one point that some people don't understand. They think that if a person's selling their property and say you haven't gotten the closing, and say, God forbid, but the seller dies, that the contract is automatically canceled. Well, that's not true. This agreement can still be binding on your estate to sell this property. And so this is also the same situation if that broker decides that they're moving on and goes to another listing office. This agreement can be assigned by that broker to another office to handle it, and that would not affect this transaction. So make sure you understand some of these miscellaneous provisions are actually just as important as the entire agreement, but make sure you understand that. And then along lines 162, it talks about how electronic signatures are applicable and will be binding. Remember the day when only the blue ink original signature documents were binding. Well, not anymore. Digital signatures are just as binding as the originals a lot of times. And that will be the case here with the Florida listing agreement. It also says signatures, initials, and modifications which are communicated by facsimile will also be considered originals and that type of thing. And it also indicates additional terms for buyers that will be recognized in the document. As you see, buyers include other terms. So just to make it clear that a buyer could be considered some AKAs there. All right, so that's the miscellaneous section. And then you have section 14. You're getting close to the end of the document. You can put additional terms here that may apply to the agreement between the seller and the broker. A lot of times you'll see in the additional terms, you'll see a broker transaction fee, which is a fee that the broker will charge to basically process this transaction through his or her office. And that can be a term that will be listed there. And after that, you will see that the seller will sign the agreement, add his or her contact information. You will see, and that's on line 172. And then you'll see on 180 where the sales associate or broker, notice throughout the entire document, we've been saying broker, 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 broker. But I want you to make sure you understand that the broker could have real estate agents that work for the brokerage. And so, even though I'm saying broker, it might not actually be a broker, it might be a real estate agent. They are distinguished in real estate. The broker is someone who can basically run a brokerage and manage other agents. A agent is basically just the agent, and you can't be an agent unless you have a broker in real estate. So, just to explain that a little more, hope I didn't muddy that. All right. And then at the very end of the form, you'll see line 183, which talks about how a copy of this listing agreement was returned back to the seller. Was it emailed, facsimiled, mailed, personal delivery, just to show proof that the seller did get a copy of this fully executed listing agreement. So there you have it. That is your listing agreement. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen here. All right. So I hope that this review of the listing agreement or introduction for some has been most helpful. If you're going to list your house for sale and you're going to use a broker, a real estate agent, then this listing agreement is a very important agreement. It also contains information on the price that you are agreeing to have your house sold out there on the open market for. So, in addition to that, there are a lot of other things, as you can see, that are very important to go over with your agent. And as long as you have a really clear understanding of exactly what is going on in the listing agreement, then chances are you're going to have a smooth transaction and a successful closing. All right, guys. So I hope you enjoyed this. I'm Lisa K. Crawford. I am a broker associate with United Realty Group. My office is in East Fort Lauderdale. We have a beautiful office. So I can't wait to do your closings there. If you need help, don't hesitate to get in touch with me. I help people buy and sell real estate here in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, in South Florida. And I'd love to help you too. All right. Talk to you again soon. Have a great one. Bye-bye.